You're listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience, a podcast dedicated to helping executives train their sales and marketing teams to optimize growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's accelerate your growth in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone, to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. I'm your host, Carlos Noche, and unfortunately, Lisa Schneer cannot join us today. But I'm really excited about having a great episode, and I'll do my best to be kind to our guests. Today's topic, when you're positioning your company, or more importantly, yourself, in an effective M&A process, what might be some of the strategies or ideas to do that? And let's face, so many companies, startups out there start out with this great goal of going public and hitting it big. But unfortunately, for many of them, a successful exit via a merger or a purchase is far more likely. To help us out with today's topic, we have Aron Bohlig, managing partner at ComCap, a global investment banking firm. Aron also co-authored a book called Mastering Technical Sales. This is a few years back, Aron, the Sales Engineer's Handbook. In all fairness, Aron and I also worked together. We were both hired by one of those hot CRM companies. We both got hired back in 1996. Yes, I even had hair back then. The company was called Clarify. And I got to say, hey, it made a huge difference because I got to meet some amazing people like Aron, and it really helped, skyrocket my career. So Aron, welcome to the show.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me today, Carlos. I'm excited to participate.
All right. So one question. Oh, by the way, here's my coffee mug. I dusted off just for you. And for those that cannot see it, it's literally my Clarify coffee mug. Oh, look at that. From
Gotta fly the flag,
back
buddy.
in the day.
Nice. Good
so,
swag.
Folks, here's a question we always start with. So, Aron, what is something that you're passionate about that those that primarily only know you through work or business might be really surprised to know about you?
Thanks for the question, Carlos. So oftentimes I don't talk about being the author of the book. So that's one thing that people are surprised to hear about. I also like to do a lot of immersive sports like scuba diving, skiing, and surfing. So my day job is very much kind of suit and tie, boring finance guy, but I do a lot of fun things as well. And one of my houses, I live about 1,000 feet from one of the best surf breaks in North America in Puerto Rico. So a lot of people are surprised to learn that as well.
Awesome. All right. We're coming down to visit you soon because my sweetheart used to surf. So let's see if we can get her back out there.
Should do.
All right. So help our audience to know you better. What was your journey to success, Aron?
Well, in the 90s, I was fortunate to have Carlos as a mentor, one of the best sales and sales managers in the business. And so I learned a lot from you, Carlos. But I started off as a technical person doing systems integration in the early 90s, got into sales, product management, went to business school, and eventually got into investment banking. And so now my job is to help sell companies. In the 90s, I was selling software, and now I'm selling businesses, many of which are software businesses. Along the way, some of the pivotal experiences were really, kind of, as Carlos alluded to, working in the go-go days of enterprise software in the 90s. It was a fantastic experience. And then just having the opportunity to sell so many businesses and working with software CEOs for the last 20 years to help them realize their dreams. It's great working with some of the smartest people around in Silicon Valley and now on a global basis and learning from them as I help them.
So Aron, thank you. That was very kind of you. And one thing that I love to mention for you and our audience is I really admire that you had a career path in technology. You were doing great. We were both directors at the time. And you completely pivoted, went back to school and found a whole other career path in investment banking side. And for so many of us, we always feel trapped in what we're doing today. And, we might drift off a little bit. You really explored a whole other highway. And I got to give you kudos because most people do not have the courage to go do that. And you not only did it, but did it successfully. And I think that's, kudos to you.
Thanks for the shout out. Yeah, I can't say that I recommend that path for most people. Most of the time, you're better off doubling or tripling down at what you're strong at. As you noted, roughly at age 30, I started an entirely new career and I had to kind of swab the decks for about 3 years just to get back to kind of the same level as I was. So that's a tough path. It worked out for me, but I don't always recommend it for other people.
You know what? Like you said, it worked out great. I mean, if you're a hardworking person and you put the effort forward, you'll find a way to get there. And you're a great testament to that. So, all right, I don't want your head to get too big. I mean, we only have so much screen space. So today's market, and then so this is my hypothesis, and then we can dive deeper into the topic of people and what they should do in M&A. Money's tight, as I tell certain people. Interest rates are high. Free money is not getting thrown at startups like it could years ago. And when we think about organizations, they're looking for strategies, ideas to make the most out of this current environment as an individual, such as a VP of sales. Do I have the right synopsis? I mean, or hypothesis, I should say.
That's exactly right, Carlos. I have lots of friends in the industry that I either counsel formally as part of an engagement where I'm selling the company, or informally when they say, hey, Aron, my company's being sold. I'm responsible for sales. How do I kind of optimize my personal situation? And so I'm going to share some of those learnings today.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a dumb question. So I think it's dumb because I think there's only one answer to it, but I could be wrong. And you're the investment banker. So besides, the ultimate dream of going public, and I'm going to say hitting it big. So some companies go public and also fizzle out. And I guess even if you go public, what are some other strategies that a startup or an organization goes? Is the merger and acquisition? That's why I say is that the other avenue or path to some success?
That's right. And especially in the current market, at least 99% of startups ultimately get sold instead of going IPO. So in general,
Wow.
as an individual, your baseline plan should assume that your company gets sold. And in some cases, when you're talking about equity, whoever, the CEO, the HR people, they'll say, okay, if we go public, this is what's going to happen. It's always good to talk to other friends in the industry and say, okay, look at these numbers, what's a little more realistic. And in most cases, I advise people to kind of dial back, what the outcome is going to be, and look at that on an individual basis. And, if the company doubles or triples in value over the course of 3 or 4 years, that's typically what a venture investor is planning on. In some cases, a company will say, well, we're going to increase in value by 10 times. I wouldn't necessarily place a lot of weight in the equity appreciation that forecasts, because that rarely happens these days. It does happen, but I would say 90+% of the time, if you look at venture returns, you're lucky if the business doubles in value, and it's very unlikely that something's going to increase 10 times.
Wow. Okay. It's good to know. My gut feel was said, hey, I got a better chance of a name. I didn't realize it could be as much as 99% of the time. That's pretty high. So can you share with us what might be some strategies, or how do you position yourself? Because you've called it, you want to be the go-to-market leader in this M&A process. What does that mean?
So generally, when an acquirer is looking at buying the business, they're obviously going to be talking to the CEO, the CFO. They also want to talk to whoever is responsible for revenue, and then whoever is responsible for product. And today I'm really going to focus on that revenue leader, whether that's a VP of sales or a CRO, and how they can shine during a sale process to generate optionality and the best economics for themselves.
What might be some either pivotal business metrics or factors that really help create the best economic outcome?
Yep. So as you're going into a sale process as the CRO, you want to be able to talk to revenue retention, generally net revenue retention. So that's a function of your churn as well as upsells to existing customers and new logos. You want to be able to talk about your pipeline progress. And one of the best things you can do is keep a snapshot of your pipeline, whether that's from Salesforce or another CRM over time, and show how you've performed relative to what you'd advertised you were going to do. Over the last 2 years, a lot of companies have underperformed. There's no shame in that. So in some cases, this may be a little bit of a tricky story, but certainly if you've achieved what you said you would do with your pipeline, you should be beating your chest about that during the sale process so that an acquirer is aware of it. And generally, an acquirer these days, it could be either another operating company, which we'd call a strategic buyer, or it might be a private equity firm. And in many cases, even for the operating companies, somebody from a private equity firm is going to participate in the process and be in the background. And you might be presenting to 15 to 20 potential buyers during a sale process. And obviously, those represent great contacts. If you end up leaving your current employer, those are people you would call. And so you want to shine and be best positioned to optimize those relationships after the deal. But to your question, once again, it's really all about the revenue metrics. If you've been able to help the company increase in terms of their total revenue, which usually would have as a CRO, those are the kind of metrics you want to call out. A lot of these metrics you should also put in your LinkedIn profile to be blindingly transparent, as well as in your CV. And then just being able to kind of speak to these in a compelling way and talk about what you personally drove at the company to achieve these metrics. There's obviously a fine line between being self-promotional and kind of talking about the strengths of the company, but a good sales leader is going to be able to thread that. And what that does is then that sets you up for whoever acquires the business. They're obviously going to understand your skills. You're going to be well positioned to take on a broader role. And that's something, Carlos, that you and I did back at Clarify and subsequently, Nortel Networks. Each of us were businesses that were acquired, a couple times in some cases. And so generally, the bigger company, you're going to have a bigger pool of competition, but it's going to be a bigger platform. And so if you're a star CRO, you may be able to go from a company that is 10 million in revenue to then being ideally the CRO at the bigger company that could be 40, 50 million, 100 million in revenue. And so it's going to open up great career development opportunities for you, if you kind of navigate the process successfully and are positioned well in that new business.
So like net ARR, the retention, new logos, pipeline. Sadly, sometimes, the reason you're looking to get acquired is because those things are declining, right? So are there any, when we talk about spinning it or, positioning it, I mean, sometimes also as we're getting acquired, we might be having layoffs to try to reduce our costs, to try to extend that time period that we could survive. And unfortunately, that also means I got less people creating pipeline. I got less people working on deals. I got less people working with customers. Any suggestions on how an individual might be able to spin that in a way that you might go, okay, it's not your fault, or I understand the situation?
Yeah, the number one recommendation is to be transparent and authentic. And I would not use the word spin when there's kind of a negative thing. Rather, just be factual and say, this happened. We didn't achieve what we expected. We had to lay off X people. I was instrumental in determining who should remain, who should go, and kind of crafting that strategy. That's really hard work, and you can get kind of value from that. And especially with a private equity firm, they're going to respect somebody who's had that type of intellectual rigor. And then you kind of give the story a full picture, be very honest about what your role was, and then spin from there. But what sometimes I'll see, especially kind of revenue executives do, is they just tell the spin part, and then
Right, they
people
try to
feel
sell.
like, yeah, exactly, which is natural. We're all trying to do that. But then people feel like, well, this person may be obfuscating or not kind of giving us the full story, and we feel like we can't trust that person. So that's definitely a potential pitfall.
Yeah, sometimes I call them word salad people. They use a lot of flowery words to describe a situation, but you're like, you don't really do much work, do you?
Right. Exactly.
I think transparency is really key these days. And in fact, I think back to my own situations, like when I came to a realization, I was at a situation where I thought it was, hey, let's grow this place, like a growth mindset. And I came to a realization that that's not what our senior leadership wanted of the company I was at. They really wanted to milk this baby and crash land it for, the most profitable return as possible. And it took me a while to really understand that. And I had to be first and foremost like transparent with myself. It's like I had to change modes. It ain't about having the best people and growing this thing and doubling and tripling. It's really about how do I what I have today and make the most out of it. And the individuals that you have for that process might be different than in a growth mode. Is that the type of transparency you'd like to see from these leaders?
That's exactly right. And that type of transition, when somebody moves your cheese so dramatically, it can require a lot of self-introspection. And in some
Right.
cases, you may say, this is not something I want to do. I'm going to do it for 6 or 9 months. I'll help kind of right the ship. I'll help get to an exit. And it's totally fine to be transparent about that as well and say, I'm really a growth guy or gal. This has been a tough couple of years. I kind of did the right thing for the company, but ultimately I'm looking to land someplace where there's more of a growth opportunity. And that's a totally fine narrative to share as well.
Excellent. Obviously you're looking to validate and validate some of this data. Are there certain systems or tools that you want to see these organizations really maintain and have real clear data on. And what I mean by that, I mean, it could be something as simple as even as your CRM and your Salesforce, right? Hey, I clearly want to see where we are in opportunities. I clearly want to see, how these things are being tracked so you can validate the information. What types of systems do you look at?
Yeah, the CRM system, whether it's Salesforce or something else, that's certainly number one as a revenue executive. And then number two would be, you're not going to own this, but having the rearward-looking accounting numbers so you can see what the revenue was for a particular client over time and being able to speak to why that client went up or down. And in many cases, if it's an annual contract that's renewed on a yearly basis with some opportunity for either upsell or in the current environment, some downsell, being able to speak with great specificity to how the sales and account management team navigated that and got to the optimal scenario. And I could say by default, many customers were reducing their software spend by 30% with all their vendors across the board last year. So if that happened, be transparent about it and say, this is what we were facing. This is what we did to try to optimize the situation, kind of given the facts on the ground, and people will kind of respect that and understand that.
Excellent. I'm assuming all these metrics we've talked about so far, and probably others, really affect the evaluation of the company. Are you looking for the book of business and the future growth of it? One, are there other metrics that you look at or aspects of the business that you look at to really say, hey, this is really worth X or Y?
Yeah, well, one thing that we see a lot is companies that haven't done well, and then they have a pipeline that's starting to explode, and they want to get value from that. And usually a buyer, they're going to say, all right, we want to see you harvesting that pipeline. And if you've done it for 6 months, great, then we can kind of project a trend line. But if you've been, let's say at a decline for the last couple of years, and then you're projecting a massive spike over the next 6 months, most people are going to say, well, I would rather wait and pay more to see that you're achieving that than kind of buy now and take the risk that you don't see that upward trend.
How important is the people beneath you and around you in the evaluation? So when you buy a technology company, for example, are you also buying the talent that's there?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I think that's something I should have included in my opening narrative as a revenue leader, kind of talking about the team, especially if you were instrumental in building that team and kind of describing, this is what we were able to do, but this is the capacity we have in a new scenario. And you should absolutely ask whether it's a private equity firm or a strategic acquirer about their business and say, okay, these are the things that we could do in light of the new situation, the synergies by working with you, and we could accomplish more with the resources you've got. And you should really approach that with a very open mind and say, this is how we can leverage the team, especially, in some cases, a company that's acquired, the sales team will then become product specialists or some kind of vertical overlay on a broader sales team. And so be open to a scenario like that. Usually something like that might last a year or so, and then you get back into kind of more of a regular, type of account coverage model. But something that's some kind of hybrid, it can make sense during the integration process, and you should absolutely be open to that and support that.
I saw some of that when Workday bought Adaptive, which was my client at the time, and how they hadn't had any specialized roles. Then they kind of broke it back out in the field, and it's funny, they went back to specialized roles. So I guess the journey continues sometimes.
Yep, it's a cycle.
You highlighted to me the importance of being able to tell the story and the vision of the company second to only the CEO. What do you mean by that?
Well, so generally, in some cases, a CEO is going to come from a product background. And so they may be able to speak very compellingly to the product, but have less of the broader vision. But ideally, the CEO is going to talk about the end market you're addressing, the competitive dynamics, the product market fit. But as the revenue executive, you're probably telling that story more on a daily basis than the CEO is. And so ideally, you're nearly as good, or in some cases better than the CEO, and you're telling that story during the sale process. There are a couple reasons that this is to your benefit. Number one, as I mentioned, you want to be positioned for that bigger job, in sales at the new company. Number two is a lot of times in practice, the acquired CEO leaves after a year. And in many cases, that can represent a great opportunity for a revenue leader to assume P&L ownership or a general management position of the new division at the acquired company. And that can be a great opportunity to diversify or expand your own opportunities as a revenue leader and get into more of a general manager or a future CEO position.
Excellent. And then, one of the other things you talked about is, hey, you're not only doing this to possibly have a position in the new company, but you're also doing this to see potentially other roles that you may have because you're, like you said earlier, you're meeting a lot of these private equity firms or it's a larger acquiring firm and they may have other roles or recommendations for you. How do you best, position yourselves there?
Yeah, I think showing well during the sale process is number one. And then, one thing I always, recommend is trying to keep to post something on LinkedIn or perhaps having a personal email distribution saying, giving a quarterly update about what you're up to. And it could be as simple as starting off with, dear so-and-so, where so-and-so is either the CEO of the company that may have been acquiring you or a private equity firm. I loved our communications. I'd be really open to, discussing future mutual opportunities. If you don't mind, I'm going to drop you a note, once every 2 or 3 months, let you know what I'm up to and let me know if there could be anything, in your world that would be relevant for us to talk about. It's kind of basic marketing, but a lot of people don't do it. I really recommend, putting something out on LinkedIn saying, this is what I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 months. We've really crushed it. We've achieved these goals. And if God forbid, if you leave the company as part of an acquisition and then, you're on the market, it's even more important to have that kind of outreach and do it in a consistent fashion.
It's funny, Aaron, one of the lines in the last almost, I guess, 100 episodes I've done this thing that have come up that have really stuck in my head. I mean, there's a million of them, but one of them is that your net worth is equal to your network. And your last statement is really about being able to cultivate and maintain that network, right? So that people, it's because you met with them once and you had a great impression. This doesn't mean that they remember you. And sometimes, like you said, you got to put that out there or reach out. And because you never know when it's the right time and right place where you might be the perfect fit. But unless you put yourself out there, they're not going to remember you.
Well said. I think everybody in sales know you've got to be one of the last 3 calls into the client to get into that RFP process or whatever it is. It's the same thing when people are hiring. You got to be top of mind, and it's a great investment of time.
On our topic today, is there any big mistake that you see organizations make going into this M&A process that kind of shoots them in the foot sometimes or really impacts either their evaluation or their ability to get acquired at all?
Yeah, 2 things. Number one is usually out of the control of the revenue executive. It's having the numbers all organized, having your accounting team being able to produce a package on a timely basis that shows the reality of the business. And then the second thing is, in many cases, when you're selling a company, it might take 6 months. And so when you show your pipeline in month 1, you should be hitting whatever the expected, pipeline conversion through month 6. And so a lot of times right out of the gate, some people show a massive pipeline and then there's no customers that transact, for a quarter or 2. And it's really, you lose a lot of credibility in a case like that.
This isn't funny, but one of my clients that was on the podcast once was talking about his success. And I said, were there any surprises? And he goes, yeah, there was a big one. My pipeline shrank 50% after we rolled out your program. And he goes, I mean, I'm not blaming you for it. The reality is we had a lot of fluff that we thought we might be able to close. But when we really put more scrutiny behind it and really thought our ideal customer profile and thought about how qualified are these opportunities really, it was half of that. But once we did that, we had a much cleaner pipeline going into the next and the next and the next quarter, which gave us a lot more credibility about really hitting the numbers that we could hit. So it sounds like you really got to be crystal clear about your pipeline and executing on it.
Absolutely right.
All right. So a couple of personal questions to kind of end this out. So one is, I don't mean to call this a mistake, but a lot of times in our careers, we learn some of our biggest lessons from missteps and challenges, right? Has there been one in your career, Aaron, when you go, oh, you know what? I went left versus right, but this is the big lesson I learned from it.
Yeah, I'd say the overall lesson is play where your strengths are and double and triple down in those areas, especially as you get older in your career. If you're a generalist and you're kind of bouncing around from sector to sector, you're not necessarily kind of building your network and your kind of intellectual property, so to speak, around a particular area. So if you're in selling supply chain software, you probably want to be the best guy or gal in supply chain software possible, and not, one day do that, the next day do CRM, the third day, do something entirely different. Personally, probably the biggest mistake I made, I turned down 2 jobs in the 90s, one with a guy named Tom Siebel, and another one with a guy named Mark Benioff, both of whom went on to be ridiculously successful. So those, I don't know how I could have thought differently, but I just didn't. I didn't drink the Kool-Aid at the time, and they were massively successful without me.
Aron, I think the reality is you and I probably drank too much of the other Kool-Aid in thinking that, hey, we got a chance against those two individuals. And at the end, you know what? We might have not been on the most winning team, but we learned something.
Yeah, we did okay in the end.
All right. Another big question I got for you is around prospecting. Just, we talked about pipeline, and you get prospected to 1,000 different ways from Sunday, just like I'm assuming. In your experience, what actually gets through? If someone was kind of cold calling it and didn't have a warm introduction into you, what might work, if anything at all?
What I find most compelling is when somebody says, "Dear Aron, we worked with company X and they're somebody who's a peer or who I would be aware of. We did this for them. Is that interesting to you?" Where this is some kind of specific, kind of financial improvement. And usually that's like, we helped them sell more, we helped them whatever, and increase revenue. And that's something, when I see that, and it could be like 2 lines, that's when I respond. If somebody sends me something with a PDF attachment that's more than a page, that sits in my email box and never gets read.
I'm with you. I try to tell, when I work with XDR teams, I go, folks, I mean, this has been true 20 years ago, and it's still true today. There's a bunch of emails I never read. I just see the heading, and I get the beginning of it. And if it's anything that's really long, and I kind of point to my phone, and I got to go shuffle through this thing. Oh, I don't got time for that. I'll read that later.
Yep.
So being direct and to the point and providing something of value to me is really critical. But it's only getting harder because I think you and I and everyone else is getting so bombarded with requests for this and that. And it's my big pet peeve today is LinkedIn. Hi, I looked at your profile, really admire you. Do you need some accounting services?
Yeah. Somebody should the internet should charge people a penny every time they hit you on LinkedIn or by email, just to keep everybody honest. I'm so tired of being sold new phone services. We don't have a phone service anymore. Who does that? So,
my other one, it's like when they try to pitch you what you actually do. Hey, would you like some financial advice?
Yeah, I love those.
Did you even look at what I do? No, we just automatically sent it. All right. Here's a grand finale question. And of course, you can talk about anything you want, but it's, for our listeners, we call it acceleration insights. What might be that one piece of advice, be it business or personal, by the way, that would help our listeners be successful as you have been?
I think the best piece of advice is when you see a good opportunity, think about it deeply, but then jump on it. I mentioned a couple that I missed, but in general, my career was accelerated by doing hard things when I got the opportunity to do it, and kind of jump through the window when it was open. And in general, so that meant for me, 2 foreign assignments in Europe, which was, both great fun, but, personally pretty disruptive, and, always taking the hardest job on offer. I never took something that was totally kind of off-piste. It was very clear that within, a year and a half, it would achieve, some specific goal, but always try to do, the most difficult and most remunerative thing that's on the table, and be very aggressive. In general, I say, don't give yourself like a 3 or 4 year window to achieve something. You should be achieving the next step in your career, every 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the chance to do that, you should switch jobs or switch companies.
Great advice. I think back to your Siebel and, Benioff example, when we were back then, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. That's the dark side. And in reality, if I looked at it more from my own personal goals and their trajectories, hey, they were on to something, but I was too stubborn in my own lane to be willing to even see it or accept it.
That was me.
Hey, perfect, Aron. I really appreciate this. If people want to know more about your services of your company, or even reach out to you personally, what might be the best ways for them to connect?
Absolutely. So my website is www.comcapllc.com. And please check me out on LinkedIn. In general, we're helping to sell companies doing 10 million or more in SaaS revenue or doing a few million in profit. Companies smaller than that, we don't really kind of focus on that end of the market, but anybody at that level or above, I'd love to talk with you.
Excellent. That's awesome. And Aaron, I couldn't thank you enough for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And it was good to catch up with you, buddy. We were talking about, I think before this, it's like, it's been 28 years since we both met at this little company called Clarify. And it's been quite a journey.
I'm really excited to reconnect with you here, Carlos, share both of our stories with your audience. And I'll look forward to getting together with you in Atlanta soon.
Same here. I might be coming down to see you soon now that I heard about the surf thing.
Puerto Rico's a great place. The door's always open. We got rum, coffee, everything you could need.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, thank you again. Really appreciate it. All right, audience, this does it for our episode. Thank you so much for listening in. You can check us out at www.b2brevexec.com or check us out on your favorite podcast platform, whether it be Spotify, iTunes, Google, YouTube. Have some fun with it. And folks, until next time, I wish you nothing but the greatest success.
You've been listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.